Good morning, and I'm looking forward to today because once again I get to visit with my friend Keith Burns at Green Cover Seed. And today's going to share with us something that we get a lot of questions about, regenerative ag. Think about regenerative ag on a big farm, production level farming, and how that relates to food plots and how we can actually make gains or faster improvements to soil health, more crop production than an ag person because we're not hauling off, loads and loads of grain or loads around bales of hay. The deer are actually consuming on site, which makes a difference. Stay tuned and we'll talk about it. Good morning, Keith. Thanks for joining us again here at Growing Deer.
Hey, Grant, good to see you again.
Boy, you've helped us with some great presentations, which has sparked a lot of questions. One just being, what is regenerative ag? That's kind of a word we throw around a lot in the ag community, but a lot of deer hunters are kind of new to that term. So I was hoping you'd take a few minutes today and tell us from not a food plot point of view, but a big ag point of view, production ag point of view. What is regenerative ag? And just glance over the principles that we know work anywhere. And you can give us some examples, and then really today talk more about the application process, if that's okay with you.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Regenerative ag, you're right. It's a buzzword. It's a hot topic. It's something that people are talking about. You can't hardly open up a farm magazine now without having an article in there. But it's a great question. What is regenerative ag? And if you ask, 10 different experts, you're probably going to get 10 different definitions. Gabe Brown, who would be considered one of the pioneers of the movement, I really like his definition, and it's just very simple. It's working with Mother Nature instead of against her. And my definition is similar, but what I'd like to say in my mind, regenerative ag, it's taking the principles of soil health, which we've talked about a lot, and we'll review them here in just a second, but it's taking the principles of soil health and applying the practices to put those into action on your farm or on your food plot. And so it's the practical application of the soil health principles. And when you do that, you're going to regenerate or rebuild or restore, however you want to say it, your soil. And that's what it's all about. It is not just, and that's why we don't like the word sustainable, because sustainable just means I'm going to take what I have and I'm going to keep it the same. Well, that's great if you're starting out with something that's really good. But if you've got a degraded resource, and almost all of us do, including ourselves here, we don't want to sustain that. We want to rebuild it. We want to regenerate it. And so that's my definition, my own personal definition. It's taking those principles of soil health and putting them into the practices. And the principles are the same. Practices are going to be different. It's going to be different for whatever your context is, where you're at, what your goals are, what your equipment is, what your rainfall is. There's just so many things that are going to change the practices, but putting those into action on your own ground. And so that's what we try to convey to people. That's what we help people do every day, is try to figure out what strategies or what practices will get those principles working on their own operation.
Yeah, you made some really good points there. And one, I think you kind of slid around, but said, but this is not a magic bean. This is not some new plant someone discovered in East Mongolia or somewhere. This is applying simple principles that are known to work throughout Africa and Europe and all throughout the United States, even down in the deserts in Mexico, and applying them to your situation. And the beans can be, so to speak, can be kind of the same, but timing, rates, other things may vary a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really why, Gabe and Ray Archuleta and that whole group there at Understanding Ag, they actually made a sixth principle of soil health, which is understand your context, because that's so important. Because all of these other things, keep the soil covered. We want living roots in the ground as often as possible. We want to minimize the amount of disturbance. We want to maximize the diversity, and we want to integrate livestock. Those are all great, and you're right, those work everywhere, but it's the context that's important of how are they going to translate into the practices, into the regenerative ag practices on your own operation. And so, that's going to be different for each person, and that's why it's dangerous to copycat somebody else without having an understanding of their context. Now, maybe your contexts are very similar, and so then, the same practices likely will work really well. But I can't tell somebody in West Texas to do the same thing that you're doing there in the Ozarks, because it's just not going to work the same, because the context, the environments are completely different.
Yeah. So I was hoping we could do just maybe some examples from the bigger ag point of view. And I'll just share ahead of time that, like, we food plotters, we convert that grain harvest or crop harvest with deer or other species of wildlife consuming our crop. And that actually, as you're explaining, can be advantageous. We can actually make some progress, maybe at a little bit more rapid scale, because we're not removing that much tonnage, deer urinating, defecating, salivating back on the field or on the property anyway. And, it's not going out in a big semi full all the time. So it gives us, I think, some advantages.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about regenerative ag or regenerating our soils, the biggest thing that we're really trying to do is we're trying to get the carbon back into the soil, because we've lost so much of the carbon through tillage, through other types of management practices, and then just physically through the exportation of hauling good crops off year after year. We are losing the carbon in our soil. And so as we talk about regenerating, a lot of it has to do with putting the carbon back into the soil where God put it in the first place. And soils, everything works so much better when you have more carbon, and it's best measured with organic matter. And so, we encourage people to get a soil test done, get the Haney test done, get some of these, get some sort of baseline so you know where you're at. So you can look back 2-3 years later down the road and look back and go, okay, you know what? I started out at 1.5 and now I'm at 2. That's pretty good. My goal is 5. And so that's what I'm working towards. And you're exactly right. Food plotters have a huge advantage because you're going to be doing a lot of the same practices with cover crops and growing roots and minimal disturbance. But you don't have the penalty, the carbon penalty, if you will, of taking a big grain harvest or rolling up hay bales and hauling them out of there. And so that's one of the reasons you've been able to just, in my opinion, make very, very rapid progress in how you built that soil, on that mountain, partly because you're not hauling stuff away in a truck or on a hay bale. And that's a huge advantage. And so we really want to encourage people, as you put these principles into practice. And so I'll just give you some examples from our own farm here. When we started no-tilling back in the late 90s, most of our soils were, organic matter 1.5 to 1.8. And we no-tilled for 20 years, and we raised that about a whole point. We got up to the mid 2s to upper 2s. And we kind of hit a bit of a plateau with no-till by itself. Now, anytime you do tillage, it's a huge oxidation event. You're mixing your oxygen with the carbon, and guess what? You get CO2, and that goes back up to the atmosphere. So once you stop tilling, that is one way to keep a lot more carbon into your soil. But we kind of hit a bit of a plateau, and so without having the cover crops and the livestock integration, we were kind of leveled out. So once we started using those, then we were able to get up past 3 and up into the 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. Now, we don't have enough livestock integration to advance as rapidly as we would like. The people that you hear talk about really having big moves, they're doing most of their harvesting with animals and not with combines. And so what we like to think, with the right practices in a normal environment, for a lot of people, 1/10 of a point of organic matter per year increase, that's pretty good. If you can do that, if you can raise your organic matter levels by a full point in 10 years, you've really done something. That's something to brag about. That's something to be proud of. In a large scale farming operation, we think that without having all the exports, so in a food plotting situation, you can probably progress twice that fast. Yes, I think you can get a full point of organic matter in 5 years with the proper practices. And and it's not just about having the living plant there, and the plant roots are going to be what's doing it, but it's got to have the biology too, because as we've talked about in other episodes, God never made these plants to pull the nitrogen straight out of the atmosphere. God never designed plants to pull the minerals directly out of the soil, out of the rocks that make up our soils. That all goes through biology. That's going through bacteria and fungal organisms and other things. And so it's got to be having both the plants and the biology together is what's going to really put you on that path to rapid regeneration of your soil.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen, of course, really rapid increases here. And I want to go back to something I think almost everyone can relate to. We talked about pasture and, pulling bunches of big old bales of hay off there. Well, that's carbon leaving the property
Yeah.
and nutrients also. And nutrients, that plant is composed of nutrients. So a lot of the more advanced farmers are doing now are just growing that stock, leaving it standing and then grazing it down. So you can see the product staying on the property, and cows again are urinating, salivating, defecating back on the land.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are doing that and they've really tweaked their technique, but are just having huge gains in soil health, very rapid, and they don't have all the cost of hauling hay off, storing it, taking it back out, feeding cattle, and big old mucky mess everywhere because they feed in the same place and cows are wading in there knee deep. So I want to put that in deer terms. We grow it, and maybe we're in the fall and they're browsing it, then we get a big acorn crop, and deer leave our food plots to go chase acorns. They're going to do that. But then we're adding tonnage and growth. And then we're stockpiling it. That's our hay barn. We're stockpiling it. And then the livestock, the deer come back in and consume it on spot. And I think that's really helped me literally build organic matter on top of rocks, literally. And so I relate to a hay farmer. We can do this simpler. We don't have to make 5 passes with a herbicide. And there's a simpler, more cost-effective way. And while we're doing this, we can improve the soil health. And one last thing I want to interject. You talked about raising organic matter, 1%. Organic matter may be a relatively new term to a lot of landowners, a lot of deer guys, but just think about it this way, and this is research, not just an opinion, but for every 1 full percent you increase in organic matter, you can store about another inch of rain per acre. So let's say you're at 1, and over time you get up to 2. Now you're holding 2 inches of moisture in the soil, and it comes that 3-week drought that's been wiping out your food plots. Well, they're probably going to hang on now.
Yeah.
So there's many advantages to increasing organic matter besides just a number on a test.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you don't do a soil test, you don't know where you started, so you don't know if you're making improvements. So please at least get just a basic soil test done, set that baseline, and then go from there. And the other thing to making a lot of this work is you got the plants and you got the biology, and then you have to start pulling back on the amount of commercial synthetic inputs, because those plants are only going to utilize the biology that's out there if they don't have the free nutrients. If you continue to over fertilize, your plants are just going to take the free stuff first and not work with the biology to do to make the system work the way God created. So if you're going to go down this path, and much like what you've done, Grant, you have to start weaning yourself off these other inputs. And why not? I mean, number one, it's cheaper. You're going to save a lot of money. And number two, it makes the system work the way that it was supposed to. But I had a friend from Australia here a couple months ago, and I love the way he said this. He says, you have to earn the right to start reducing your inputs. And what he meant by that is you can't just do that without setting yourself up to have success. So you have to be doing no-till because you got to keep that ground covered. You have to have the right biological organisms in the soil, whether you put them in as an additive or you've developed the habitat over the previous several years to cultivate them naturally, and both is best. But once you get yourself set up to do that, now you can start reducing it. But if you just come in and just try to completely shut all that off at once, you haven't earned the right to do that, and you're going to see your system crash.
Yeah, Keith, and I think it's important to note that these synthetic inputs, just nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, let alone herbicides, and people may be calling chemistry, they're all chemicals, but those are actually detrimental to this biology you're talking about. Is that correct?
It certainly can be. I mean, they're not naturally occurring things, and we're not saying that you have to completely eliminate them, because they're a tool. Just like tillage is a tool, fire is a tool. You have tools in your toolbox, but if you're working on your car and you're overusing your tools, well, you're going to go backwards instead of forwards. And so only use the tools when you need to, and use the appropriate tool for that. And so, one thing that is great about these multi-species cover crops is when you put them out there, herbicides are no longer a tool for you, because, when we plant a, 8, 10, 12 way summer release blend, you can't go, that's not Roundup ready. And I think when people were just using Roundup beans, and I can say this 100% for sure, because all these big farmers, including ourselves, have fallen into this trap of, Roundup ready corn, Roundup ready soybeans. Well, that's really, really easy. And we had some really good years doing that. Well, now we've got resistant weeds. We've got other diseases that have crept in because we were doing things the easy way for too long. And so it's the same way with food plots. If all you do is plant Roundup ready soybeans and you go out there and you're spraying it, you'll have really nice, clean plots for a while, but pretty soon you're going to start getting the resistant weeds, and then your soil biology completely shifts, and it's going to be good for soybeans, but it's not going to be good for anything else. And so now, as you try to introduce diversity, you don't have the right biology there for these other organisms. And so, having the diversity out there is really going to be the first start towards making all of this work.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, Moultrie Mobile, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, RTP Outdoors, Fourth Arrow, Hunt Stand, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Ward Laboratories, Burris Optics, National Land Realty, G5 Broadheads, Prime Bows, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
I think it's really interesting. Mississippi State has more recently started sharing more of this, but deer are concentrate select feeders. They have a real narrow mouth. They want the best bite here. Even if you see them out in a 100-acre bean field, they don't just stay in one place like a cow would and start gorging. They take this leaf and that leaf or that leaf, whatever. They're concentrate selectors. They can sense which individual leaf, not just plant, is the most nutritious or fits the needs they have at that current moment. Maybe they need a bit more calcium or phosphorus or whatever. So when you have I've noticed in my place, when I have a very diverse blend in my food plot, man, deer love it, right? Because they're getting what they need that day at that moment. They may take 2 bites of buckwheat as an example, and a bite of a bean, and a bite of ash, whatever we got in there. So blends actually fit the whitetail deer as a concentrate selector better than even monoculture. Now, piles of big deer have been grown on beans or alfalfa, but if you drive through Iowa, the big deer state, that's all there is, right? There's beans and corn, and deer are not eating corn, and there's so many deer, they've wiped out all the native vegetation. You get into timber, and it's bald in there. There's nothing in there except anything that's not palatable to a deer. Literally, it's a disaster that all those wild plants are gone. I mean, they're gone from the landscape.
Yeah.
But planting a blend can really make your deer herd more productive, and that's very exciting to me.
Yeah, deer will be a selective feeder only when they have something to select from.
Well, this is great information. So we're going in, a few southern guys might be planting, but going into food plot season, everybody's phone's ringing off the hook, food plot questions. Someone's just getting ready to start this. Just quickly walks through some steps. Okay, I'm tired of this, man. I've been planting Roundup Ready, and Roundup's costing me an arm and a leg these days, and tired of that stuff drifting on me on the tractor. How do you get started here?
Well, you get started by setting down and making a plan. And, for most areas, if you have adequate rainfall, you should be planting at minimum twice a year. If you are only planting food plots in the fall, so your harvest plots or your kill plots, heavy in brassicas and high attractiveness, that's going to be great for the deer, but it's not great for your soil, because then the rest of the year, it's either just growing up in weeds, or you're spraying it, or you're tilling it. Why not have a diverse mix growing there as well? So that's why we work with you. We put together the summer release. We have the summer browse pressure release, which again, it's going to have 8 to 10 different plants in it. It's got legumes, it's got brassicas, it's got grasses, it's got other broadleaves. So it's got a wide diversity, not just in the number of plants, but in the types of plants as well. And some of those are selected because we know they're going to be really great for the deer, and others are selected because we know they're going to be really great for the soil. So like the grain sorghum, for example, the deer aren't really going to eat much of that plant, which is a good thing because we want that plant growing for the soil. Now they'll take advantage of the grain head later in the season, but the plant itself can be growing and really helping fix and restore that soil. So that's where I would start. Start with the summer release, and then grow that out. And again, you've documented this well in so many of your videos. You grow that out until you get to, in most areas, probably, that middle of August type time frame when you want to come in with that fall food plot. And then ideally, if you can plant straight through that. And again, we don't want to be spraying it out if we don't have to. We don't want to be tilling it under if we don't have to. Drill right through it, and you'll knock a lot of it down. A lot of it will die. Some of it's not going to die, and that's okay. That's okay if some of that wants to grow with your fall release, and then you plant that fall release. And one of the keys here is that the fall release is going to have enough things that overwinter that now that's a wraparound, because that's going to overwinter. And this time of year, before we can get out there and plant our summer release, we've got something growing. We've got our rye. We've got some of the cold tolerant clovers that are still out there growing, providing protection for our soil. The root exudates are feeding the biology, and it's still providing probably one of the only green things around for both the deer and the turkeys this time of year to be out there hitting on. So it's kind of that two-step program. Now, to get started, it's really helpful if you can start with a clean field. So if you've just got a big weed mess out there, use some of your tools. You may have to go out there and spray that with Roundup to get started as clean as possible, because once you get these cover crops established, they're going to be pretty good at being competitive. But if you put them at a disadvantage by letting the weeds have a huge head start, they're never going to catch up. So do what you can to get your cover crop a fair chance to start, and then it will do a pretty good job. It won't completely eliminate weeds, but it will really keep them at bay. And a few weeds is not the end of the world, as long as you are in a structured program to where, okay, well, these may go to seed, but I know I'm coming in with cereal rye as a fantastic weed suppressor. And again, that's why we kind of modified fall release, and there is a fall browse pressure release if you need to have higher rates of some of that cereal rye for down the road.
Keith, great information as always. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share with us food plot guys. And of course, we'll be having a couple of field days here at the Proving Grounds too. A lot of people decided to see the new project. We're starting early on, right? Yeah, people used to come for years to the Proving Grounds and see 5 inches of deep black soil and cool infiltration rates. And we're like a lot of people out there. Part of our design is we're starting at a much younger level in the process, and you can follow along and see our successes or our mistakes, and there's going to be droughts, whatever. So June 9th and 10th will be the first field event at the Proving Grounds 2 this year. So look forward to seeing some face-to-face and just really talking this through at that time.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see you starting over. I know one of your passions is building things, building, for other people, but especially for yourself. There's a lot of fulfillment that comes from doing that. So I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see it myself. And I like the fact that you're going to be doing some of it with, some of your no-till drills and crimpers and stuff, but you're also going to be doing some just simply with hand tools, because that's what some people have. And again, that's part of the context of where you're at. So I like the fact that you're going to be demonstrating more than one context for people. Yeah,
great. Keith, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and experience again. And I just hope you have a blessed day.
All right. Thanks, Grant. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, and for everyone out there, thanks for watching as always. And I just hope Keith and I both hope you take time today to seek the Creator's will for your life and follow him, listen to that will, and apply it to your life daily. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.